Australia has more black wealth than you think it has, and the stories behind it are genuinely extraordinary. We're talking about a former child soldier who taught himself to read and became one of Sydney's top criminal lawyers, a black man whose father won a national championship alongside Michael Jordan, and at number 1, a black family whose grandmother was stolen from her parents by the Australian government and whose grandson carried the flag at the Olympics. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Exom family. Let's kick things off with a family whose story runs directly through the greatest basketball player who ever lived. And that is not an exaggeration. Cecil Exom was born in Goldsboro, North Carolina in 1962, and he played 4 years at the University of North Carolina between 1980 and 1984. Which means that in 1982, when the Tar Heels won the NCAA National Championship, Cecil Exom was on that roster alongside a freshman named Michael Jordan. Before Jordan became Jordan, Cecil was winning a national title with him. Then he did something almost no American player of that era would have considered. Denver drafted him in the 9th round in 1984, and he never played an NBA game, so instead of grinding through the American minor leagues, he packed up and moved to Australia. And he built an entire life there. He played a decade in the Australian NBL for the Bullying Boomers, the North Melbourne Giants, the Melbourne Tigers, and the Geelong Supercats, averaging nearly 11 points a game across his career, and he won an NBL championship in 1989. Then he stayed. He married an Australian woman named Desiree, had 3 children in Melbourne, and spent 27 years coaching junior basketball in that city. That's the part people skip past. He wasn't a mercenary import who took the money and left. He coached other people's kids for nearly 3 decades. One of his own kids was Dante, born in Melbourne in 1995 alongside his twin sister Tiara. And in 2014, Dante Exom was selected 5th overall in the NBA draft by the Utah Jazz, which at the time made him one of the highest drafted Australians in history. His career has been genuinely difficult, with serious injuries derailing long stretches of it. And what I find impressive is what he did about it. Rather than fade out, he went to Europe, played for Barcelona, then won a championship with Partizan in Belgrade and made the All-ABA League team in 2023, and used that to force his way back into the NBA with Dallas. Cecil Exom died in Los Angeles on the 2nd of July 2023, at just 60 years old, after being in intensive care with lung problems. The Australian NBL issued a tribute to him, which tells you exactly how that country came to see a kid from North Carolina who showed up in the 80s and never went home. The Exoms crossed an ocean by choice for basketball. The family coming up crossed one to survive. Number 7. The Maker family. Thon Maker was born in what is now South Sudan during one of the most brutal civil conflicts of the modern era, and his family did what hundreds of thousands of South Sudanese families did, which was run. They went to Uganda first, then Australia, settling in Perth, Western Australia, which by that point was home to one of the larger South Sudanese communities in the country. And then something genuinely unusual happened, because Thon turned out to be 7 feet tall with guard skills, and by his late teens, he was one of the most talked about basketball prospects on the planet. In 2016, the Milwaukee Bucks selected him 10th overall in the NBA draft, and he became one of the very few players in the modern era to jump essentially straight from high school into the league after the rules changed. His NBA career ran through Milwaukee, Detroit, and Cleveland, and he later took contracts overseas, which is where a lot of the actual money in international basketball now sits. His younger brother Macher went professional too. Now, I want to be straight with you about the numbers here, because you will see figures floating around online claiming this family is worth tens of millions of dollars. Nobody publishes verified net worths for private families like this one, and Thon's documented NBA earnings, while substantial, don't support the largest numbers being quoted. What is real is that 2 brothers from a refugee family in Perth both reached professional basketball, which is a statistical improbability so extreme it barely computes. And what they've done with it matters more than a number anyway, because the Makers have consistently put money and time into sports clinics and educational programs for African Australian kids, particularly within the South Sudanese community that raised them. The Makers came to Australia as refugees. So did the man at number 3, and he arrived not knowing how to read. Number 6. The Daniels family. Dyson Daniels was born in Bendigo, a former gold rush town in regional Victoria, to an African-American father named Ricky, who had come to Australia to play basketball and stayed. That's a pattern you'll notice repeating on this list, and it's worth naming. Australia's NBL spent decades importing American players, and a meaningful number of them married Australians, had children, and quietly created a generation of dual-heritage Australian athletes. Ricky Daniels was one of those imports. His son became one of the best defenders alive. Speaking of raising one of the best defenders on the planet, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called the Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the sun, and how quickly the biggest stage found out what he could do. Dyson went 8th overall in the 2022 NBA draft to the New Orleans Pelicans on a rookie-scale contract, then got traded to the Atlanta Hawks, where he genuinely exploded. He became known around the league as the Great Barrier Thief for how many steals he was generating, and he has now earned all defensive honors, which for a player that young is exceptionally rare. He also came up through Australia's Centre of Excellence program in Canberra rather than the American high school system, which is a detail Australian basketball people are enormously proud of, because it means the country grew him rather than borrowing him. What I like about this family is how visible Ricky has stayed throughout. This is not an athlete managed by a distant agency. It's a father who played the game professionally, understands exactly what the money and the pressure do to young players, and has stayed close to the whole thing. Dyson Daniels is still in his early 20s, and if he signs the extension his defensive reputation now commands, the family's finances change by an order of magnitude. The Daniels family is at the beginning of the curve. Number 5 is further along it, and he built something outside basketball entirely. Number 5. The Thibault family. Matisse. Thibault has one of the more unusual backgrounds in professional basketball, because his father Greg is a Haitian-American engineer, his mother was Australian, and Matisse spent a chunk of his childhood in Sydney before the family moved to the United States. He now holds dual citizenship and plays international basketball for Australia's Boomers rather than for the United States, which was a genuine choice and not an accident of paperwork. On the court, he is a specialist of the purest kind. 20th overall pick in 2019, twice named to the NBA's all-defensive second team, and known throughout the league as one of the most disruptive perimeter defenders alive. His contract history is public and worth stating accurately because there is a lot of nonsense online about it. He signed a 3-year deal worth just over $33 million with Portland in 2023, which works out to roughly $11 million a year, and in July of 2026, he signed a 1-year deal with the Los Angeles Lakers worth around $3.3 million. His total career contract value across 3 deals sits just under $49 million. That's a very good living. It is not the $17.5 million a year figure that gets repeated in places, and I'd rather give you the real number. But here's why he's genuinely interesting, and it has nothing to do with basketball. During the 2020 NBA bubble, when the entire league was sealed inside Disney World with no outside contact, Thibault started filming his own experience on a handheld camera and posting it. It went enormously viral because it was the only real window anybody had into the strangest season in NBA history. And it was made by someone who clearly just found it fascinating rather than someone executing a media strategy. That built him an audience completely separate from basketball, and it opened doors into film, photography, and creative work that almost no player his age has access to. Thibault built a second career with a camera. Number 4 nearly had a completely different first one. Number 4. The Green family. Josh Green grew up in Castle Hill in Sydney's northwest, the son of an African-American father. And here's the thing about his childhood that Australians find genuinely funny and Americans find baffling. He was good enough at Australian rules football that AFL clubs were paying attention. For anyone outside Australia, that needs explaining, because Aussie rules is not a niche sport there, It's the biggest game in the country, and being tracked by AFL recruiters as a teenager puts you in a very small group. Josh Green was inside that group and chose basketball instead. That decision took him to the University of Arizona and then into the 2020 NBA draft, where Dallas selected him 18th overall. He spent his early career with the Mavericks, won a rotation spot on a team that reached the NBA Finals, and then in 2024, he was moved to the Charlotte Hornets as part of the deal that brought Klay Thompson to Dallas. He has since signed a multi-year extension worth tens of millions of dollars, and I'll be honest that the precise annual figures floating around online vary, and I couldn't verify the largest of them. What isn't in dispute is that he's one of the better-paid Australian players in the league and still only in his mid-20s. His parents relocated from Sydney to the United States to support his development, which is a genuinely enormous thing for a family to do, and they've stayed involved in his affairs since. So that's 5 families built on basketball, and if you've been watching this thinking, something is missing from a video about Black Australia, you're right, and we need to talk about it. A quick word about what this list is actually measuring. Here's something that anyone from Australia will have been shouting at the screen for the last few minutes. In Australia, the word black does not primarily mean what it means in America. It refers, first and most commonly, to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the oldest continuous living cultures on Earth, who have been on that continent for something in the order of 60,000 years. Every family we've covered so far is part of a much newer story, which is the African diaspora arriving in Australia, either through basketball or through the refugee intake from South Sudan and elsewhere. That story is real and it matters enormously. But if you make a list about black wealth in Australia and it contains only that story, you have quietly skipped the entire history of the continent. There's a second thing worth saying plainly. Every single number attached to families like these online is an estimate, and most of them are invented. These are private people. Nobody files a public net worth for a Melbourne family with property and a basketball contract. So when you see a very precise-sounding figure like $45 million attached to a private family, treat it the way you'd treat a stranger's guess. With that said, the last 3 entries are the strongest stories on this list, and the man at number 1 answers the question in the title properly. Number 3. Deng Adut. Deng Adut was 6 years old when soldiers took him from his mother in South Sudan and conscripted him into an army. He spent his childhood as a child soldier. He was shot in the back. He was carried across a border by his brother inside a corn sack. He eventually reached Kenya, and then in 1998, at around 14 or 15, he arrived in Australia as a refugee, unable to read or write in any language, including his own. Now think about what happens to most people after that. Nothing good, usually. Survival is the whole achievement. Deng Adut enrolled in night classes at TAFE. He taught himself English. He went to Western Sydney University, then earned a master's degree in law. And he founded AC Law Group in Blacktown, in Western Sydney, a criminal defense practice that became genuinely prominent. And he built a reputation for taking on clients from refugee and migrant communities who had nobody else. Then in 2015, Western Sydney University made a short film about his life for an advertising campaign. It was not supposed to be a phenomenon. It went around the world and pulled in tens of millions of views, and it turned him into one of the most recognized people in the country. The following year, he was named New South Wales Australian of the Year. He published a memoir called Songs of a War Boy. And in 2016, the artist Nick Stathopoulos painted his portrait, and it won the Archibald Prize People's Choice Award, which means an enormous number of Australians walked into a gallery and voted for the face of a former child soldier turned lawyer. His fortune is nothing like the American basketball contracts on this list, and stated figures for it are unreliable, so I won't pretend otherwise. What he has is a successful law firm, property, book income, and one of the highest speaking fees in Australia. But of everybody in this video, he is the one whose life most completely refuses to make sense. A boy conscripted at 6 ended up arguing cases in Australian courts. Adut rebuilt a life from absolutely nothing. The man at number 2 was handed the biggest contract any Australian basketball player has ever signed, and then had to survive what came after it. Number 2, the Simmons family. Dave Simmons was an African-American basketball player who came to Australia in the 80s, played in the NBL for the Melbourne Tigers and others. married an Australian woman named Julie, and stayed. Same pattern as the Exoms and the Daniels family, one generation earlier. His son Ben became the most hyped basketball prospect Australia has ever produced. Ben Simmons went first overall in the 2016 NBA draft to the Philadelphia 76ers, won Rookie of the Year, made 3 All-Star teams and 2 All-Defensive First Teams, and in 2019 signed a 5-year maximum extension worth $177 million. That contract remains the largest ever signed by an Australian basketball player. And then it became one of the most scrutinized careers in modern sport. A collapse of confidence in the 2021 playoffs, a very public falling out with Philadelphia, a trade to Brooklyn, and then years of serious back problems including a herniated disc and repeated nerve impingements that cost him entire seasons. He has since moved through the Clippers and, at the time of writing, his NBA future is genuinely uncertain, with Australian outlets reporting he's spending time competitively fishing. On the money, I'm going to give you real figures rather than the inflated ones. Credible published estimates of Ben Simmons' net worth range from around $50 million up to about $100 million, depending on which outlet you trust. You will see claims of 244 million Australian dollars attached to this family. That figure is roughly double the highest credible estimate anywhere, and I wouldn't repeat it. What is documented is that in 2023, he paid $14 million for 2 units in a Brooklyn building still under construction, combined them into a single 5,200 square foot apartment with a gym, a pool table, and a home theater, and listed it in March 2025 for $17 million. Whatever happens to the basketball, he remains the wealthiest person on this list, and the story underneath is still a Melbourne kid whose father chose to stay. Simmons has the biggest bank balance here. The family at number 1 has something you cannot buy. Number 1. The Mills family. Paddy Mills was born in Canberra in 1988, and to understand why his family closes this video, you have to go back 2 generations. His father Benny is a Torres Strait Islander from the island of Miralug. His mother Yvonne is Aboriginal Australian, of Kakatha descent. And in 1949, when her parents separated, Yvonne and her 4 siblings were taken from their family by the Australian state. She is a member of the Stolen Generations, the tens of thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children forcibly removed from their families under government policy across most of the 20th century. That is the grandmother in this story. And on the other side of the family, Paddy Mills's great-uncle was Eddie Mabo, the man who took the Australian legal system all the way to the High Court and destroyed the doctrine of terra nullius, the fiction that Australia had belonged to nobody before European arrival. The Mabo decision in 1992 established native title in Australian law. It is arguably the single most significant legal victory in Indigenous Australian history. So this family did not inherit money. They inherited the fight. Paddy's parents founded a basketball club in Canberra called the Shadows, the first Indigenous Australian basketball club, and that is where he learned to play, at 4 years old. Like Josh Green, he was good enough that Aussie rules clubs came calling, and like Josh Green, he chose basketball. Portland took him 55th overall in 2009, which is close to the bottom of the draft. And what he built from there is remarkable. 16 NBA seasons, more than 900 games, an NBA championship with the San Antonio Spurs in 2014, 5 Olympic Games, captaining the Boomers to their first ever Olympic medal in Tokyo, where he scored 42 points in the bronze medal game. And in 2021, he became the first Indigenous Australian ever to carry his country's flag at an Olympic opening ceremony. His net worth is generally estimated around $8 million, which is by far the smallest figure in this video, and I put him at number 1 anyway. Here's why. Mills founded the Team Mills Foundation and launched Indigenous Basketball Australia, a national first, building competitions and pathways for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. He has repeatedly donated his entire national team salary to charity. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia. In 2025, he moved into a general manager role in American college basketball while still playing in Europe, which at 37 is not a man winding down. Every other family in this video arrived in Australia and built something. The Mills family was already there, 60,000 years deep, and had to fight the government to be recognized as owning anything at all. That's the real answer to the question in this title. And those were the black families building serious wealth in Australia. But notice how many different stories are sitting inside that one sentence. An American who won a title with Michael Jordan and ended up coaching Melbourne kids for 27 years. Two brothers who fled a civil war and reached the NBA from Perth. A boy taken as a soldier at 6 who ended up with a law degree. And a family whose grandmother was stolen by the state and whose son carried the flag. So which one of these families surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to Black Status, because here, we break down stories like this every single week.